Hi everyone, welcome to this session. My name's Abigail Scott-Paul. I'm Global Head of the Humanise campaign. And this afternoon we're going to be discussing the importance of creativity in the buildings and streets that form the backdrops to our daily lives. And we're really delighted to be doing it in this amazing space here, a building that's full of care, creativity and craftsmanship. And to debate the need for more joyful, engaging and human cities, we have three joyful human beings with us. So first up, LionHeart. He's a multidisciplinary artist and poet. His practice through the language of performance and film explores architecture and poetry's relationship with emotional inhabitancy, memory and mental health. LionHeart is a fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects and was artist in residence at the Falling Water Institute. Next to him is Lisa Finlay, an architect with 20 years of experience designing buildings and places that aim to improve how we live. As a partner at Heatherwick Studio, she leads complex international projects with a focus on the systems that shape healthy cities. She cares deeply about how the industry transitions towards more sustainable construction and the role of design in justice and social repair. And last but not least, we have Richard Upton, a developer, but a creative and thoughtful one who gives a damn. He's built and grown 5 property companies over 4 decades, delivering exceptional, characterful places, including 20,000 new homes, libraries, fire stations, hotels, restaurants, and whole town centres. Nowadays, he's providing bursaries to students in real estate, lecturing and funding social impact projects. He's also a commissioner for Historic England. So can we give them all a round of applause, please? So what surrounds us shapes us. The buildings we walk past every day impact us on us consciously and subconsciously. This is something we instinctively feel and know, and I'm sure we're all feeling something in this space right now. And yet, over the past 50 years, something's happened. We seem to have lost the ability to deliver soulful and creative buildings, or they're the exception and not the norm. In parts of the city here and in cities elsewhere throughout the globe, we've been served a menu of soulless, monotonous, drab development. Buildings that bring us down rather than lift us up. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can design for emotion, for people, and for meaning. So LionHeart, can I ask you to reflect on the importance of a more creative, joyful, and nourishing built environment?
Of course. So, I think it's fair to say we all care, right? Just in different ways. Like, okay, a building shapes us in the same way an opinion sways conviction. But a building is simply a losing argument if it cares to interject more than it cares to actually listen. At best, we just want a real commitment, a real relationship to connect and explain the great ways in which humanizing the built environment makes sense. That's it. The truth is, we're intuitive, right? We like what we like. We're stakeholders in architecture, even if we're just passing by. Our mind is literally reading the room, even if we're outside, we're in dialogue. And for a long time, we've allowed people to speak for us. But this time, we want a little bit more autonomy. We need more than intention. Honestly, we need an extension of generosity. This time, give us intrigue, curiosity, give us artistic audacity, give us camaraderie in the form of an informed architectural universality. Okay, that's a mouthful, but give us a proposal we can engage with. All we want is a relationship, the kind that holds our attention as if design is divine intervention, a suspension of disbelief. We need buildings to shape us like the movies, through compassion, through empathic action. Human emotion literally could be at the forefront of architecture's functionality. Wouldn't you agree, an integral part of any community are values? Values that amount to unity. This is a truce between the miscommunication of buildings and human beings. We desire to be loved, to be cherished by buildings that uplift us, that reignite us to thrive. Right? The built environment literally is the ecosystem of our lives, of our minds, and of our well-being. This isn't about taste, okay? We want to marvel at the art of it all, to feel like we're in this together, to feel included, contributing to what matters to us all, in the grand scheme of adapting the world through empathy, through the sensory elevation where the architectural touch points for the joys that we share become the vows that architects commit to, a far-reaching ambition held at a distance, but that together we can actually get to. So, how about it?
That was wonderful, thank you. I love that line, give us intrigue, curiosity, give us artistic audacity. What do you think has been missing when it comes to the design of our streets, buildings and cities?
First of all, thank you for enjoying the poetry. It comes from the heart. I think when I experience the built environment, intrinsically, I'm looking for something that wants to attract me with a sense of like playful allure. Like when I studied architecture, it was a thing which we found like we couldn't wait to get to school. We couldn't wait to figure things out. But when I walk down the street, I don't care to figure things out. I feel like there's a dissonance and a distance between a playful allure and empathic resonance that can just come with play. And there's such a stoicism that we feel when it comes to architecture. I know it's quite in place, but I'm really curious about the parametric side, which kind of gives us that sense of like embodied movement within a still figure. So I feel like playfulness is at the heart of everything. And sometimes it's mirrored into like the work culture as well.
I love that. Yeah, playfulness is so important. And how do you think the people responsible for our built environment can really engage with the people for whom they're designing the buildings?
This can be quite controversial. I think, you know, it's very easy to say, let's just get in a room and have some conversations, but the self-work that architectural practitioners do, and I'm talking like, you know, from a psychological terrain to even a physiological one, that knowing of self helps you understand the individualistic understandings that people have that you can now merge into a collective consciousness. But if you don't have that internal dialogue with yourself, or again, being open to seeing how you feel intrinsically, you're going to be disconnected to everyone else and how they feel.
And do you see as poetry as a route to be able to unlock that?
This is my 9 to 5. Like, I'm literally like hoping to like enable architects to like, and it sounds so highfalutin and poetic, but like the more we engage with our core selves, the more architecture can engage with it too. So yeah, that's my 9 to 5.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to come to the architect on the panel here, Lisa. So I think you are somebody who strives to bring a creative and human approach to the buildings and cities you're involved with. So from an architect's perspective, what are the biggest challenges when it comes to making the case with a client or a city leader about more joyful development?
I think I think about how people experience buildings and the frustrations that people have with, you know, modern architecture today. And I think in a way there's a bit of a absence of understanding of who the commissioners really are. So from an architect's perspective, when you receive a brief, the difference in that brief can be so stark depending on the mission behind that commissioner. So say you're working with a charity or a housing association or something like that, the mission and drive behind what they're doing is so clear and it comes through in everything that we get to do. And I think you can get commissioners where that mission and purpose is just so many layers, it's too hard to get to. There might be a decision-making board that's just completely detached from the team. And then you're there trying to, you know, really make the best of what you've got, but there just isn't that interest. So I think, you know, just hearing some of your words and thinking about, imagine if that level of poetry coming through in some of the briefs that we get. It's very rare that you get such a strong mission and purpose in what we're asked to do, and we're the ones that are trying to bring it out, in very limited circumstances.
And do you think language is a barrier as well as an enabler? It can also be a barrier, the language of architecture.
Yeah, I think language is a huge tool that we can use in really powerful ways, and I think architectural language can be quite difficult to understand depending on what words you use, and we should be using much more straight, plain English to talk about the built environment. And that's because being able to talk about it in a way that everybody can understand, it shouldn't be mystified, it shouldn't be intellectualized too much, I think, because everybody's got a really strong instinctual response to how they feel about buildings. It's just actually in the sort of planning environment, in the commissioning environment, we don't really talk about it like that. It's very rare that you get to talk about what we really want this place to do and how we want people to feel. It's all about what policy are we meeting, or what requirement have we met, and what have we still got to do, and where are those spaces and environments to talk about that? Because actually that should be number one. Everything else comes from that.
Yeah, and we've just taken a lovely walk down a street where the streets really did sing to us. We were stopping and looking at them.
Yeah,
you work all over the world. Where can you give us good examples of where there is joyful and creative architecture that is the norm and not the exception?
Well, I was thinking actually the ones that really bring me joy are kind of everyday buildings, and they feel a bit like an exception because it's a bit like a gem that you walk across. So I've lived for years quite close to here in Mile End, and there's a new housing block there that's called Regent's Place, and it's changed the way that I walk. I used to walk one way, and I walk a different way. So I go past that small building. It's just 30 new homes, but it's from brick. It's got archways. It's got openings that frame the sky. It's got strange angles, and you've just got things to look at. And it's an infill project. It wasn't there 3 years ago, and now I walk that street instead of that one. And that's the sort of influence it can have.
Yeah.
And I think there's lots of examples in and around London. There's lots of really good architects doing great work, but I think it's how does it become the norm? It stands out because it's not the norm.
Okay, well, let's come to the developer on the panel now. So Richard, you describe yourself as a force for good. How do you respond from the development sector to the call for more creative and joyful buildings? It's something you've put into your practice, but how can we shift the dial on this within the sector?
Yeah, look, LionHeart, wow. I'm still reeling from that poem. You need to design some places, as well as
we'll do it together,
poetry.
right? We'll do it.
We need to
Here first.
take down the boundaries of between architects and poets and engineers and things, and the emotion that comes through talking about architecture and place from that is so powerful for me today, and gives the sort of soul and the need for soul, and the importance of the human connection. And I'm going to come back to that. And Lisa, I would disagree with you that there aren't many examples, and I'll come back to that, of really characterful places that are newly built. And so I was reflecting on this, and I feel like I'm the elephant in this room, because I'm a property developer, right? Which is not someone you want to sit next to at a dinner party. You want to sit next to the brain surgeon or someone that does good. But it shouldn't be like that. The property developers are the people that write the brief, and then they build the consequences, whether good or bad. And so there's a sense of responsibility. So to the first line in your poem, so I think it's fair to say, we as developers don't care enough. And my feeling is that is such a substantial crime, because as developers, the consequences of poor development affect health, happiness, hope for a very, very long time. They last just as long as good buildings, sadly, and that's the crime. But worse than that, the environmental impact of the construction and development industry crucifies this planet more than any other industry on earth. And so that's the weight of the crime about doing something wrong. And so I think we can sort of give architects some blame and planners some blame. You read it in the press, and governments some blame, and they should take a share of the blame. But actually, the root cause of poor places is in my industry. It's in the property development industry. There is insufficient care and responsibility. And look, I'm sorry for the accountants in the room. There's too many accountants running property development companies and house builders. You know, there needs to be more creative spirit. We need a renaissance in purpose. Another poem and talk I was listening to from you, LionHeart. We need more creative understanding and leadership to write that brief, because it's that important, and that needs a sea change of attitude. And to your point, Lisa, we need more great examples of what great looks like. I reckon if we did a survey in this room of, tell me, you know, count up the number of great, characterful, authentic, inclusive, beautiful communities that you've seen built, I don't reckon you're going to get to the end of one hand. You know, and how can that be when it's just so you know, important? And you know, just some notes I wrote myself here. The most ridiculous thing is, and I've proved this on countless occasions, and I open sourced the data and everything else, and others have done it too, that really beautiful, soulful regeneration, particularly with heritage at its heart, with storytelling, the authenticity of place, not just old buildings, the stories of place. Property by definition is local, and so stay local and bring that alive like a farmer would plough a field. You know, the characterful development, soulful regeneration outpaces characterless development on every single metric when you do the maths, if you can be bothered. Short, medium, and definitely long term. So the property industry just doesn't care enough. And we need to change that. And how do we get it to care enough? What needs to change? Well, look, I'm a sort of grumpy old man, so, and I must admit, I've given up a bit on my generation, and I'm back. So the very best property development course in the land still teaches, and I was lucky enough to get free education. Otherwise I wouldn't have gone and studied property. I wanted to make places. I wanted to start fires in a positive way. So I'm back at the best course in the country, and they teach the process beautifully. Everything, planning, law, financial, everything. They build these widgets that pop out of Reading University. And so I went back to the course director there and I said, you're missing one thing in this curriculum, Eamon, Professor Eamon Darcy. And he said, what's that? I said, the purpose of it. And that's the most powerful thing there is. What's the point of property development? It's to make the world a better place for everyone in a really inclusive way. Think how compelling and inspirational that is. You can repair the planet, you can repair broken communities, you can do that, and you can make some money. And there's a room like this of 120 odd Generation Alpha eyes looking at me, and they get it, and they're up for it. So I'm going to try and infect as many of them as I can in the next 10 years. So do you think working with young people, that's the answer, LionHeart, do you think?
I secretly have a project that kind of aligns with that, which we're probably gonna have to talk about outside of this. But yeah, they're the strongest influencers. I think, when we think about how music impacts us, there's always a viral trend that originates from the genesis of the youth. They can see what we don't see. They sensitize themselves to what we don't feel. And again, we have got so numb at a certain point. We're like, it's not my problem anymore. We're just going to get through the day and get through the week and get through the year. Whereas the youth, they're like, every second matters.
Yeah.
So yeah, tapping into that is really important, and allowing that to be like a pollination point for us, where we go back to that, extract, and then spread it out for the rest of the generations.
Yeah. And Lisa, the argument's kind of been won when people talk about interiors and interior design and what that can do for office workers. People want to have kind of more light or plants, and they know that is better for people. So what do you think the barrier is when it comes to thinking about the care and attention that's been put on the inside of a building, that being translated to actually care and thought on the outside of a building? Are there arguments, is there evidence that we can use to make that case to developers?
Well, I think there's a lot more research coming out. It's kind of an understudied area in a way, the impact of buildings on people and their emotions and how they feel. But I think it's becoming much more known that there is a really positive impact for much more visually complex buildings. Modernism had a lot of, there were some bonuses, but in terms of how designers used materials and how we've designed from that point onwards, we think about materials as products, as systems. We don't think about them as the incredible exploration of a material that it could be. And I think trying to get back to that and bringing so much more interest and three-dimensionality and really exploring materials in a way that we have just forgotten how to do. And I think there's a real positive, in a way, exponential growth in that area because of the climate crisis, because of sustainable materials, because of us thinking differently about how we're going to use materials, because we have to. I think hopefully there could be a really interesting shift in that, and we need it. Yeah. So I think the two together could be very exciting.
Yeah. And I guess the other elephant in the room is cost, right? This is difficult, challenging stuff to do. There's a cost to it. And how do you get around that? Like in the developments you've worked on some amazing sites all over the country where you've put care, you've thought about the local heritage, you've thought about how to bring out the stories of that place and of the people who live in that place. How do you make the economic argument or the commercial argument to do that within your business and for your shareholders?
You simply, it's the wrong phrase, but show the peasants Paris. You prove it. As a business model. It's easy if you liberate the talents of the team at Heatherwick or somewhere else, great creative minds, and say, okay, not only does it need to be beautiful, but it needs to work like that, otherwise it will never get built. And it's an iterative process where there's mutual respect and the engineers involved and everybody else and the landscape architect, and we get to it. I think on page 462, I think it is, in the Humanise book, Mr. Heatherwick suggests that
some in the audience, I think.
Good design only costs 5 or 10% more. And we're hoping to start a project, and that's where the cost plan is, Lisa.
We're up for it.
You can do it. You just have to have the purpose. You can buy very nicely designed clothes that can still cost the same money. You just might have to hunt in different ways or create things in different ways. It's the same with property. It's the same with architecture. But you have to want to do it.
Yeah.
And it's the industry that's sort of lazy, and the brief is lazy, and it tends to want to cut out variable risks because there's so many planning risks and too much regulation. And so you just dumb down the easiest thing, which is the box you build at the end, because everything else is risky. And that makes it work. It's just lazy. But the crime is that box lives with us and doesn't create poetry in the mind, for 40, 50, 70 years, and then it gets knocked down, which is even worse.
Lisa?
But I think there's something about taking a really long-term view, and some of the really interesting commissioners, they're thinking about legacy. They're thinking about what's this going to be like in 100 years' time. And that, in a way, is a bit of a luxury because not many people can think like that. But that is when you can get really great architecture commissioned. And it could cost more, but in a way, it costs less over time. The impact of commissioning something really, really well, and the health impacts and the social impacts of something that's really going to last. It takes a long-term view to get to that point, but it's worth it. And it's tough if you're looking in a short-term way.
Presumably with the climate crisis as it is, that is something that will just become more normal, that we have to think about designing buildings that can stand the test of time, that are resilient and don't contribute through demolition and rebuild to carbon emissions.
Yes, but in a way, and it's coming in, really factoring in the cost of design that is not working for the climate, but it's not there yet. So in a way, that the cost to the climate is not priced in at the moment. And that's why, buildings are being designed as they are. But it will come in and it will change.
Yeah. I'm going to come to the audience in a moment, so please have some questions. I wanted to talk about the collaboration of artists with architecture and that collaboration with engineers. Do you think there's, because it feels like sometimes architects are quite divorced from the other bits of the profession, and actually, is there a need to bring in more types of artists into that collaboration? Is that something you do through your work? Is it something that you can see is beneficial?
I think for me, I get to be very disruptive and unorthodox in my practice. Like I would say that when I do like residencies with architecture firms, whether that's internationally or nationally, I get to create like a new Venn diagram of how they work as a practice. Like again, you speak about purpose, but like that's the nucleus of a renaissance, right? It's like once we get the understanding of how we can be different, how we can be innovative, how an artist and architect are actually symbiotic like components, that's when we can really have that fun moment. And it's almost like when you're in a playground and you see these two strange kids who don't know each other, but they look at each other and go, and they just start playing, and it's the most enjoyable feeling. I think we really need to look at buildings like little kids. Sounds so simplistic, but the amount of care, you can see a baby on the road tomorrow and you're like, oh my gosh, who is it? Like we need to have that same empathic allure.
Yeah,
really do. So yeah, that's the work I do, residencies.
Lisa, Lisa, for you, do you see how you might be able to play a bit more with?
Well, I mean, hearing your words today, it changes how you think about what you're doing. And so I think working with people from different industries, from different perspectives is hugely beneficial. And it gets you out of what you typically do. And, you know, I've just finished a collaboration with an artist. She's a sculptor. I think it shifted how I think from now on, in a way, just that sort of 8 weeks. There's so much to get from it. And I'm trying to find any excuse to do it, even if it's not in the brief. I'm like, well, maybe this is an excuse to work with this person or this person. And actually, that's one of the things I love about, you know, the role is who can you collaborate with on projects, because it's never just the architect. It's a huge team, and you can have writers, you can have designers, you can have musicians, you can have landscape artists, who knows, like so many different people you can bring in. So you have to collaborate, but it's who you collaborate with and how you can open it out.
And I think, Richard, on the Mayfield Depot site in Manchester, you work with a spoken word artist. Is that right?
We've done it hundreds of times, but one of my talks to the students, I tell them, here's some special sources, some secret sources to great regeneration. And it's an alliteration. I say heritage, art, and an immediate start. Got those, you're flying. So heritage storytelling, not just the buildings and whatever, the story of place. Art, fill everything with art and artists, because there's no boundaries, and you don't want boundaries. You want to stay childlike, because then you can go a long way. And an immediate start, take down the hoardings, bring people in, break bread, start building trust and relationships. So we had a scheme down in Greenwich, all new build, and so lacking in, you know, something old to tether it to, but in a very historic place and on an old riverbed of the River Thames. And so I commissioned Lem Sisse, the Olympic poet at the time. It was 2012, and we built this crazy cafe with Morag Myerscough. Lem came in and wrote this poem called Shipping Good, about the ebb and the flow of the tide over history underneath our feet. And he read the poem in this pop-up cafe, and the poem is now engraved on the street and up the wall. And so you're just stitching all of those components together, and, you know, something new becomes something tethered and something relevant.
Yeah, that's incredible. Right, I've got a few minutes. We can open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions for our panel? If you just say who you are and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me? Yep. Hi, Hannah here. I'm from Macquarie Bank. Thank you for this panel, super fascinating. And I loved your last question about interdisciplinary collaboration, bringing multifaceted skill sets together. I went to a talk earlier this week about neural aesthetics and how you can look at neuroscience and architecture as one. And that for me was super fascinating. And I've actually never thought about the senses in that way before. My question is that where you do see this industry moving towards? Do you see universities teaching more multidisciplinary type courses, and how do people start to think more about this in that holistic way?
Great question, and that is something definitely the Humanise campaign is looking at, trying to bridge that understanding from the world of neuroscience and practice. Lisa, do you want to answer that question?
Can I jump in? I've got like a bunch of books I need to recommend.
Well, I guess, you know, it's really interesting seeing some of the research that the Humanise campaign is commissioning. And I think it in a way, again, demystifies why we might like things and why we might not. And it just gets down to a very base human response. And so Colin Ellard is one of the researchers who's just looking at cortisol levels. And you know, it's very simple kind of increases or decreases. And in a way, it almost takes the emotion out of it, but it does show that it exists. And I'm actually quite interested in also more qualitative stuff, you know, and actually that's where words and you know, just how do people talk about buildings? You know, I think it's people have really different ways of experiencing them. And I think some people don't talk about it at all, you know, and it's a bit like trying to say what you think about art. You know, what do you think about that building? And the more we do it, the more people will get really, really literate at it, you know, and will understand more about what people think. Sorry.
LionHeart.
Don't apologize. We really need longer time. We really need
Yeah.
time. I'm just going to list the names. Sarah W. Goldhagen, based in New York, has a book called Welcome to Your Environment, I think. Ben Channon, based here. Elena Gregorio, based here. And Suchi Reddy, based in New York. Like, they're doing the work already. And I feel like it is like a filtration process. Like, it's going so many places. And if we don't have the bastion of Humanise, we're not going to have like anchors to be like, come, this is the sign in which we can go. So yeah, all of those parties are doing the great work in that, from neuroarchitecture, neuroaesthetics. It's incredible. Like, keep on going, honestly.
Great question. Any other questions? There's one at the back, I think.
Hey, my question to LionHeart, that what inspired you to get into poetry, and how do you embrace rejection? Why doing poetry where you get rejected from a collaboration? So how do you embrace rejection in poetry as well?
Great question. I'm going to try and be succinct. I think I started poetry in 2011, and in 2016, I was a young, voracious, hyper energetic boy who just walked into like architectural practices, like, we should do residencies, we should do poetry. And there was a series of countless rejections. I mean, this happened for maybe 2 years. And there were specific firms who were curious, and they were, you know, inquisitive about how could this be of relevance and important. And you kind of learn through that process of being rejected that poetry requires endurance, right? It's something you have to tap into, and it pops up in the most random of times. So I would just say that persist, and that endurance becomes a muscle that will strengthen you whenever you get told no. Yeah.
Great question. One more question, if we've got this lady here. Yeah. Is there a mic?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chantel, run a company called The Barefoot Planter. So questions to Richard, actually. So I started with gardening, and I've been working with like the council on a few projects, and I've also got residency in Dagenham. But I want to branch into real estate, but more from a biodiversity and community engagement point of view. Do you feel like developers are interested in that when they are developing things, or is it more of the architectures that, because I feel like gardening is quite the afterthought and it's not integrated enough throughout the whole process. It always feels like let's put some flowers, instead of like, how does community actually engage with it? So yeah, I guess for everyone, but thinking maybe Richard.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it goes to the point I tried to make earlier about responsibility. The net gain of biodiversity is critical to our ecosystem. But the development planning system is so over-regulated that by the time you get to tick box number 97 and another consultant, and your planning application is many, many millions, and the local authority whose planning officers, are under-resourced to read any of this stuff, it becomes a bit disappointing when some of that effort that goes in isn't really debated and discussed in the creative process. It's just a tick box process. But actually, to my first point, it's a responsibility of us to develop in a thoughtful, inclusive, beautiful way that lasts for a long time. And landscape is so undervalued in sometimes of that process, and it's probably the first thing that's enjoyed.
Yeah.
You'll probably connect with the landscape a few nanoseconds before you connect with the architecture, and it will give you something back. So look, I think it's high up there on a sense of responsibility and joy. And I think as soon as we get the data from all of this stuff, developers will actually be able to attach the fact that a better designed landscape development and everything else will create more value, will make you live longer, will make a happier community, and then perhaps that will encourage some change.
Brilliant. Right, we're nearly at time, but I do have one last question for each of you. So we stand on the cusp of a so-called building revolution. Angela Rayner's committed to a target of 1.5 million new homes. Quickly, what would be your message to her? And I'll start with you, LionHeart.
Embrace emotional inhabitancy. Learn how we feel and how that's embedded into our environment.
Lisa?
I would say think how we want to live, not what we want to build. Think how we want to live, and do you want to live there in 100 years' time?
Richard?
I think it's great that it's a priority. We've got a housing crisis. It's a basic human right to have a beautiful home and an affordable home. But with the greatest respect to this government, 1.5 million in this government is absolute bullshit. It will never happen. It won't happen. It's just a soundbite. What we should be looking at is 6 million beautiful homes with thoughtful landscape and enhanced biodiversity, and spend the next few years getting the infrastructure and the culture right in the industry so we can do it properly.
Brilliant. Please thank my guests. And if you aren't already, please follow Humanise campaign. We're on social channels, and next week we'll probably be posting the poem, so you can follow up there. Thank you very much.